All right. Thank you for being here, Chris Donaldson, biker, traveler, writer, and more. What was your first motorcycle?
First motorcycle was a BSA Bantam.
Okay.
Going way back. It was probably the first reason I got into trouble with going around the world on a motorbike, because I was in school one day. I was about 16 on Saturday. I'd been up to no good and got into detention. And I read in one of the motorbike magazines about a lady who was riding around the world in a BSA Bantam. So I remember distinctly thinking, if she can do that, I can do that.
How old were you then?
I was about 16, I guess.
16. Okay. So no biking before that?
No, well, you need to be 17 to ride on the roads in the UK on a motorbike. So I think I bought it when I was about 15 or 16. I was doing it up. And then 17th birthday, you're away.
Okay. So then when did you, if that's the idea of riding around the world, when did you start thinking, okay, this is seriously going to happen?
Probably, kids are like, once you get an idea in your head, you think that's going to be it, So it was probably 1976-ish, that sort of thing. It was 70s in Belfast were not a great place to bring up children. We could look out our windows and see bombs going off and people getting shot. Not like a Middle East or anything like that, but it was sort of low-grade civil war going on. There was about 3,000 people got killed in it over the decades it was on. But basically, kids at my age at that stage, we wanted to get out of town. We wanted to go somewhere else. And Australia seemed to be a good place to go.
Did you go to Australia then, or just thinking about going?
Well, I left, finally got going when I was about 21, which is 1979. And I got from Belfast to London, get my visa sorted out and that sort of thing. It was about the week after, so it was about 5th or 6th of November when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over the American embassy in Tehran, which wasn't very good for the 50-odd Americans stuck inside, but it also stopped my journey to Australia. And basically, I was already left home. I already told all my friends I was away, so I couldn't go back 2 weeks later and say, I'm not going now, So I decided to go to South Africa, through the Middle East, across the Sahara, and to Cape Town. And the problem is, kids don't notice these days, is in those days you couldn't check everything up on the internet. You only had the information in front of you in books and maps, which I didn't have any of. So it was basically, after planning for the last 2 or 3 years to where I was going to stop practically all the way to Australia, I was basically flying blind without any idea what country was next.
So how did you keep track of the trip when you were going? Was it pictures, video, or journaling or anything like that?
Yeah, I did a lot of journaling, a lot of pictures as well, photographs. I had an old cine camera with the Super 8, I think we were called, but it got hammered with the vibration at crossing the desert. So I got very few movies out of it, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, mainly keeping a journal and photographs.
How much travel was off paved road or any road at all, percentage wise?
Well, it was certainly before what do you call them, adventure bikes these days are very popular for people. Of course, none of them actually do any adventures on them. They usually take them down the motorways. But so my planning had been for India, going to India, which all the roads were pretty much paved that I wanted to go on. Whereas Africa was a different story. Going across the Sahara took about a week and a bit, which is all off-road, going across sand dunes, through shale, all sorts of stuff. I had a Motor Guzzi Le Mans, which I'd done a few alterations on it for comfort mainly, but it's not the sort of bike you would pick to go into the desert crossing.
What kind of equipment did you take with you then?
Just basic touring stuff, clothes, map, had a radio or a CD tape recorders, the tape machine that I could play a bit of music on the way. But it was really just a bog standard motorcycle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Say these days people think you have to have an adventure bike to go far, but the motorbike you have is your own adventure. You know, you make your adventure on it.
How much does that bike weigh? Is that a less than 500-pound bike
It would be less than
without the
five.
gear?
Yeah, I think it's about 200 odd
Okay.
kilograms, which would be probably about 400 pounds with it.
Mm.
So the Mon, it's basically like a cafe racer, so it's fairly well stripped down anyway. So put a screen on it and panniers in the top box. But really, the beauty about it at the time was it's a very simple machine and quite low weight, which is hugely important because people carry so much stuff these days, kitchen sink practically, all the gadgets, and the bikes are getting heavier and heavier. You know, the BMW GS 1200 or 1300. That thing falls. You're never going to get it up again once you get some stuff in it, you know. I think people have lost track of what really a good adventure motorbike is.
How much gear did you take? Did you take tents and things like that, or just
I took tents, sleeping bags. Like everybody, probably I took too much stuff. Ended up giving it away or throwing it in the bin along the way. And really, when it was really started got into the groove of traveling, my bags were half empty because I always had this thing about carrying too much gear. I don't even like riding a motorbike with a pillion on the back. Most motorbikes are set up for solo riding without gear. You know, when every time you put something on, it slows it down or upsets the balance.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the travel on there. I found that the less you take, the definitely the better. And then as far as clothes, things that are comfortable and durable, I got those like racing boots that I always wanted when I was a kid for dirt bike riding. And then I actually put them on and I was like, oh, these are not comfortable at all. If you're going to be in a wreck, it's probably a good idea to have those on. And if you're in a race, that makes sense. But if you're just on a road or a dirt road and you're not driving crazy, I think you're okay with a regular type of boot or like a work boot or something, steel toe, if you like that.
Yeah, and you get somewhere like Africa, it's 40 degrees centigrade. It's dirt roads. You end up you're wearing sneakers and a t-shirt, and your chances are it's probably too hot for you even to keep your helmet on. You know, so you have to adapt for what's in front of you.
40 degrees centigrade. I have no concept of what that is in Fahrenheit. Well, let's see. So 50 would be like 120. So is that around 100 Fahrenheit? Any idea? Or are we just speaking different languages?
I think we're tired. Well, I used to know the difference, but I can't anymore. Old money and new
I used to think, man, why didn't we just do metric and then it would be good, but I can't even learn it now because it's not instilled in my base programming. I can't conceptualize the distance. It always comes back to football fields, which is interesting that it, shows the biggest impact a football field has.
Yeah.
And then I only realized it, which makes perfect sense, obviously, a few years ago, maybe when I was talking to a person that grew up with the metric system and they had no idea how to think in Fahrenheit. And I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a matter of knowing the difference. And I think it was 70 something. We were growing up, they had pound, shilling, and pence here. And there was 20 shillings in a pound. There was 12 pennies in a shilling. So it was 120, 120 shillings in a pound. So it was a nightmare.
Yeah. Yikes. So you're traveling, you're journaling to keep track of all this stuff. And did you think you were going to write a book about it when you started, or when did that idea come up?
I guess once I got across the Sahara, I remember thinking this has been pretty incredible so far. I had been keeping notes up until then, but I started seriously journaling then, in the format of a manuscript. got to Cape Town and got a job in a sailing yacht race back to Europe. And the sponsors of the race were a shipping company, so they shipped the bike to LA. So flew over, picked it up in LA, drove up to Canada, across Canada, stopped down south, stayed in North Carolina, worked there for a bit, and then decided to go to South America. So went down through Central America, across to Panama, or across from Panama to Colombia, which is, we're landing in Medellin, just sort of early 80s, just when Pablo Escobar was in his prime, probably.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit of a scary place. So finally got down to Buenos Aires, and a few sickness, a few problems with the bike and that sort of thing, because we were both pretty hammered at that stage. And yeah, at that stage I thought there's definitely a book in this. And I started writing when I got home. And then a guy called Ted Salmon wrote a book called Jupiter's Travels, if you've ever heard of it.
I haven't. He's not the guy that rode the Gold Wing around, is he?
No, it was another guy.
Okay.
But he wrote a book, basically much the same journey as I'd had. So it's sort of, I just stuck my journals away in the bottom drawer and forgot about them for a while, like 40 years.
Yeah.
But then when I started writing the book, I realized that my journey was a 21-year-old guy, student just out of college, whereas he was a 45-year-old journalist. So what happened, the journey he had and I had was completely different. So that's when I got off my ass and finally started writing a book, which was good in a way, as it turned out, because I was able to read the journals that I'd written as a 21-year-old, now being 60-odd, and you're basically reading about somebody that you used to know rather than the same person. So I think the book's much richer for the fact that I was able to bring in a bit of depth as a 60-year-old and to write the story of thought by a 21-year-old. So I tried to write the book as much as possible to sound from the voice of a 21-year-old, which seems to have gone down well with most good reviews on it.
How did you find that process? Was it difficult reading that and then trying to put yourself back in that place, or was it easy?
I thought it was going to be much more difficult than it was, because you know, it's like as you get older, you forget about a lot of things that went on in the past. As I hadn't really talked about the journey to many people, because you can see, you start telling people about riding a motorbike across the Sahara, and pretty soon their eyes start glazing over and they fall asleep, you know. So, but whenever I read the journals and looked at photographs and started writing, things would come back to you, especially with the photographs, and you'd write that down, and then you'd look at them again a week later and think more things would come back to you. So suddenly realized that, you know, everything that's happened in your past is still in your brain there somewhere, but it's just a matter of bringing it to the surface. And it's amazing what I could remember. Obviously, you don't remember what people said or what the words were, but you know what direction of what they were saying was. You remember what the emphasis was, you know. But it was surprised how easy it was once I got into the groove for it all to come back.
Did you have a good amount of pictures or no?
Yeah, probably over 500 odd photographs of the original journey. So some are good, some are bad, but they're good enough to ignite the memory to bring it back to the surface. Yeah. So it was interesting. No, definitely, it all came back. Not all of it, but I got sick in Bolivia, got hepatitis. So there's a few blank spaces there, but pretty much all came back.
Of all the places you've been, what are the ones that felt the most dangerous?
Probably the whole of Africa at that stage was pretty dodgy. We were in Uganda just after Idi Amin got deposed. So they were between one civil war and another one. They were just taking a few days off. As the middle of Africa seemed to be really going from one coup to the next. Rhodesia was just changing into Zimbabwe. Apartheid was in charge in South Africa, so it was all a bit dodgy. And then, of course, Mexico, from Mexico down to Medellin was heavy. But I never really felt my life was in danger too much.
Do you think that's from being the 21-year-old doing it instead of the 60-year-old?
Well, when you're 21, you're invincible. You're nothing.
Yeah.
You're never going to die. So certainly a little bit more careful what to do with things on the bike these days.
I wonder if there's a balance to the perception of safety and how much you're actually danger you're in versus younger or older. The idea of older being people would bother you less because you're not as threatening, but then would they bother you more because you're an easy target or a seemingly easier target versus you're young and you just don't pay attention to those things and just the intrepidness keeps you going versus the experience of being older where you're like, well, maybe I'll avoid that spot and go around this way instead of straight through.
I think when you're older, yeah, as you say, you learn to avoid situations and talk your way out of a situation and see what's going to happen. Whereas if you're young, you walk right into it. But when I published a book a couple of years, 3 years ago now, one of my mates said, "You never got to Australia. Why not have another go?" And after a couple of beers, we decided that wouldn't be a bad idea. So I still had the original bike in the garage. So I said, if I'm going to do that, I may as well take the original bike to get the same, as close as possible to the same guy doing the same trip on the same bike. So I actually finally got to Australia last year on the same bike, which was pretty cool. But because I'm saying that now, it gives me an opportunity as well as other things, just to compare what it was like 60 odd years old riding a bike, the same bike in dodgy situations than it was when I was 21. And certainly I realized when I was 21, I was probably crapping myself most of the time because I was so far out of my comfort zone. Things are happening.
Well, at least you realized it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often think when you're riding in the rain or whatever bad situation, in the fog or the wind, and you're like, I wonder how much longer I'm going to keep doing this before I decide this isn't what I want to do anymore. Did you have any of those thoughts going across Australia, or was Australia, I would think that that's easier than Africa.
Much easier in Africa. Yeah, no, Australia was a bit of a booze cruise compared to Africa. No, one of the tricks I used to, if you try and think about riding a motorbike across the Sahara Desert without falling off, you think, well, I can't do that, and if you do fall off in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you're either going to break something on the bike or break something in yourself. You're going to be in trouble. So what I usually did was break things down. I'm not going to ride for a day. I'm not going to ride for the whole desert. I'm just going to ride for half an hour, and see if I can ride half an hour without falling off. And if I do that, we'll see if we can do it another half hour after that. And I think by doing that like that, you're able to keep your brain in focus for a reasonable period of time without losing concentration or losing sight of what's going on. I found that very good way of getting myself through a lot of this dodgy places.
Was the Sahara more like sand dunes, or was it just dirt?
A lot of both. A lot of sand dunes. Some Nubian desert, which is pretty sandy. But it'd be hard packed stuff as well. So one minute there's one day I think it took us all day to cover about 11 miles because there was so much sand, so many wadis to get over. On other days you could blast along. It's like a tabletop. You do 70 mile an hour across the desert. Hard sand, hard rock. It's actually the rocks were the worst because the rocks, it had to put its hair down to about 12 pounds a square inch to get a flat enough surface to cross to get across the soft parts, which meant that the rocks you would hit would then take a big, the try and take a bite out of the tire, and the tire actually, the bindings broke on it and developed big bubbles coming out the side. So, as I say, it's not to be recommended taking a cafe racer road bike across the desert.
Yeah, I would imagine. Did you have to clean the? I guess that's probably air cooled. I guess it doesn't have the intake.
It was air cooled, yeah. But carburetor filters, extra filters in the carbs.
Yeah.
But yeah, the bike went well. I mean, it's a simple design. Moto Guzzi V-twin. Everything's chunky, made to last, and so it ended up a good bike to take.
With the trip across Australia, then, how did you keep track of that? Did you do more pictures? Obviously, digital versus film, probably, but
digital versus film, as he's saying. I also had a pro. What do you call them?
GoPro.
GoPro. Brain's going to a couple of GoPros with me as well, so I've got some good videos of it. So hopefully, we'll be another booking in the offing for that. Should be called Adventure Before Dementia. Sort of directed at the older audience, as I say, because certainly in the UK and most countries now, the bikers are getting very old.
Yeah.
When I was young, when you're 17, you bought a bike because you couldn't afford a car, so it's a way to get motorized without at a price you can afford. Whereas now, the kids, my daughter's 17, and all her mates are get cars bought as soon as they get their test. They get a car bought for them. So it's boys, I don't know, young kids, they don't seem to be interested in motorbikes anymore, the same way as we used to be.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll come back. But yeah, I think my biggest draw to it was the freedom of it. And by that, I mean being able to go where you wanted to go, but farther than you could walk.
Yeah.
I think that's, if you had a horse, it would be similar to that, except, of course, you could go probably farther on a bike if you had roads, farther on a horse if you're just going cross country.
Yeah, I mean, when you got your bicycle, when you were 10 or 12 or whatever, you were able to go out on your street into maybe 10-block radius or whatever, without going too wild. And getting a motorbike was just stepping out up to a couple hundred miles, whatever way you want to put it, depending on the motorbike. But yeah, it was all part of growing up. But I mean, most bikers in the UK are in their 60s and 70s. If you go to a bike festival, they're all grey haired. If you got hair, you're doing well these days. You're riding a motorbike.
Yeah, the last trip I went on, we planned to do camping along when we were going through the mountains. And then it turned into, well, let's just stay at this place that has cabins. And that was nice. And then you stayed at a cabin the first night. You're like, might as well stay at the cabin if there's one available the second night, along the way. And then you go through a day of just raining and you're all wet and you're like, tent or a hotel. Maybe a hotel would be good.
Yeah. Well, certainly when I went through traveling across Turkey and Pakistan and Iran this 2 years ago, I had a tent with me, but it was very much like a parachute. It would only be used in dire emergencies when I could find a hotel. I think that's fair enough when you're 66.
Yeah. How much stuff did you find yourself taking more on the trip across Australia than you did before? Like, is the older you taking more supplies, or
no? I took less.
You need less. Okay.
Yeah, I certainly need less because, and again, people say about spare parts. What are you going to carry? How are you going to know what's going to break? And by carrying a box of spare parts and tools, you have more chance of you breaking something because of all the extra weight on the bike. So
yeah,
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, So little is best. Yeah, carry is what you take on a weekend journey, basically, plus a few extra t-shirts. As you say, your chances are you're going to be stopping in a hotel every night or a couple of nights. Just stick everything in the sink and give it a rinse off.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, it's a good idea to have the paper map backup, but I rarely do that. I mean, I might have a small folding map of the state I'm in or whatever, but you use the GPS so much that you feel like the extra weight of that's no good. And then when you start thinking about tools and things, you're like, well, am I really going to need the tire levers? Am I going to change the tire myself, or am I going to call somebody? Where am I going to be? And I guess the idea is more of the allure to it, where you're like, I could do it if I needed to, but if you needed to, you probably still call somebody else.
Yeah.
Just depending on.
No, as I said, the important thing is I think to be able to pick up the bike easily enough that if you do drop it, and I did drop it a few times, fell over. I didn't fall off it, but it fell over a couple of times. And one time especially was hard because it sort of fell over towards a ditch and I couldn't get a good gripping to pick it up. So I ended up throwing everything off it and trying to get light enough to pick up. And if you're on your own, it's probably hopefully going to be the hardest thing you're going to have to do as long as you don't fall off.
Yeah, a smaller bike I can see, or a lighter bike would be better. On the, I think it was Long Way Around when their camera guy's bike broke, which was the BMW. Then he got like a Russian bike or Chinese bike. I can't remember where they were when it broke, but it was like a 250 and it was no problem compared to all the video time of them trying to drive through places and falling over and trying to get things back up, where if you just took what you call now an enduro bike or something, and you're there. I mean, you're not going to carry as much gas. So that's probably the thing that's on my mind the most is where am I going to fill up next? But I don't know. How'd that work out for you? Was that a concern, or do you often run out of gas, or a stress that you didn't need?
It was a stress. I mean, the bike will do about 200 miles, 250 miles in the tank. But across places like Iran, you got a lot of desert. You could be 200 miles between petrol stations, so it's touch and go. And you get to the petrol station, all it is the guy with a big oil drum of petrol with pouring it into bottles anyway. So it's all pretty basic stuff. The nice thing about having an older bike in that sort of situation is an older bike will be able to cope with the lower tolerances, I suppose, that a modern bike has. If you just pour petrol out of a water bottle into a modern bike, it'll probably choke.
Yeah. The tolerances. So then when you're compiling for your book of going across Australia, and I guess US is going to be in that book as well?
Well, I didn't actually go across Australia, so I went across Europe and Asia to Nepal, and then I flew back to Brisbane and drove down to Melbourne and back up again. So the road across Australia is probably about the same. I think it's maybe even bigger than the States.
Yeah.
And it's basically, I think there's one road and nothing much on it apart from desert. Sort of road you cross just to tell your mates in the bar across to Nullarbor.
Yeah.
When you get to 60 odd, you think, I don't need people to tell people in the bar that. I'm just
go over this part.
The smart guy takes the train over that bit,
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine about 10 minutes into it, you're like, and you're out of civilization, just in the outback, that then you start thinking, is this something that I want to do? But maybe when you get older, you have enough wisdom built up to say, okay, I don't think that's something I want to do. So let's just drive along the coast. That might be more fun.
So I like to think it was the smartest thing to do, but yeah. So what was the question, sorry, you were asking there?
Putting the book together, you're doing a second book, right?
Yeah.
You haven't done it already? Okay. So putting that together versus the first one, do you find a lot of differences in the style of it or your ability to do it since you've written one before?
Well, it's all been a learning curve, pretty steep at the start because it was never exactly an academic at school. Then spell checker wasn't available in those days, so that was part of the thing. But yeah, I did a couple of online courses before and while I was writing the first book. And then I wanted to write it as if it was a 21-year-old speaking rather than an old guy. So I had to sort of think back, well, what would I have thought in those days? So it's a bit extra work with that. Whereas with the new book, I'm just going straight onto the computer, as I say, as a current stage in my lifestyle, in my life turn. The first book very much a coming of age story, which I didn't know at the time it was because I was too close to it to know it was coming of age, if you like. But so I was able to put that extra sort of reflection onto the story, but spoken as a 21-year-old with the the experience that I wouldn't have had, you know. So this one's going to be more as I am, and in a different part of life, because a lot of my friends are all retiring now, and it's interesting speaking to different people. Some of them are going straight into things that they wanted to do, they've been yearning to have the time to do for the last 20 years. But a lot of other guys are retiring, they're walking out of work one day and they don't know what to do with themselves because of no plans, no hobbies, no job anymore. The kids are all away and they really don't know what to do. So I'm trying to look at it as a, riding a motorbike might have been when you were a kid, but it's a good thing to build on, to build a story, to travel across continents or cross country, whatever you want to do, but just get out there and do something. I'm digging the garden all day.
Yeah, I wonder if you could put in just every now and then the 21-year-old you thought about in your new one. So it's like two people are going across because you've already lived the 21-year-old you, and then you've come back later and remembered it and recorded it, and now you're doing the other one. That I wonder if you could write it as there's two riders going, and they're both you, and then the different perspective of each one.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, there's two riders. The 21-year-old is riding a motorbike still, because I still think I'm about 35 at the minute, actually. And then I look in the mirror and realize I'm not. But, let's have a look at that and see what various situations, what I would have done as a 21-year-old as to what I would do now. I would have been taking more risks in those days. I mean, the choice to drive across Iran or travel across Iraq and Syria, I chose Iran because Iraq was still a bit dodgy. Whereas if it'd been 21, I would have just gone straight down and done it, probably, you know. So yeah, it's interesting. I'll have a look at that. It's a good tip.
How do you compare your experience with it with like the Ewan McGregor, Charlie Borman? Yeah, of their long way around, long way down. Did they have a long way across or something? The one they did with the electric bikes was a little more disappointing to me, but not that I'm disappointed by electric bikes, but just it seemed more commercial than the others. Yeah. But when you have all those vehicles with support, that's got to feel and be different than you're out there on your own.
Yeah, I mean, they rode the bikes, they did the trips, they did the tours, they got the stamps, got the T-shirt, but it's a totally different journey, really. You know, I think they had, I read the book, I think it was 25 people on the back page that he was thanking for, and the picture of everybody made him do. There's 25 people behind the whole trip.
Yeah.
And give it to him, he did the journey and they rode the bikes, but when you're on your own, it's like traveling on your own. It doesn't even matter, your motorbike, whatever you're doing on your own, you're a different person than you are when you're with a crowd of people. And you'll have different experiences because you're not a threat for a start. If you arrive into town with a dozen of you, a lot of small towns, people lock our doors, you know, don't want to know. Whereas you're on your own, you're less intimidating. You're on a motorbike, people see who you are, what you are, and they'll invite you in, they'll buy you a beer, whatever. And you can learn about yourself, learn about the culture, learn about the country you're in. Whereas you won't be able to do any of those things with a crew like that. We did talk to a TV crowd one time before we went, and it was going to be something like that. They were going to drop off and see us in bits. But you know, do you get Top Gear in the States?
Yep.
Jeremy Clarkson.
Yep.
You know, they take it to an extreme, and as much as you know it's been rehearsed. You know what they're doing is made for the camera. It's not the journey. They're driving across Zimbabwe was the last one I saw, I think. But they're not really, you know. It's not a feature film, but it's not far off it, you know.
Yeah, there's some production to it.
Yeah.
Versus just the survival of going out there on your own.
I think when they went to Argentina, they got into trouble down there and they had to get out of town. I think it's something like 12 vehicles You had the three cars that the three guys were driving, but the trucks
Then
and
the
spares
spare. Yeah.
ringing up. But no, it's they're not taking anything away from you and Charlie. They did, and if you're a film star, I guess you gotta have security, you gotta have all that sort of thing too. But you don't get the journey you would have got on your own.
Yeah. When you're putting together your books, how did you go about putting the first one together, and how long did it take? Did you schedule time to say, okay, I'm going to work on a chapter or work on a topic or work for word count? How did you keep yourself going through the putting it together?
Much more sporadic than that, I suppose, because some days you feel like it, some days you don't. Some days you put pen to paper or at the keyboards and it all just comes, it all looks good. A lot of times you're rewriting it. So it's one of the things I read or learned more about, even professional authors that have written 200 books, they'll still rewrite and rewrite. You read the manuscript. That's really just the start of it. Finding out what the problems are, what sounds right, what all the not quite going through it. Well, you're sort of going word by word. So
how much was writing new exposition about it versus just putting in journal entries? Like, how much did you have to rearrange?
Most of it. I had just making it flow, making it sound interesting. You don't want it. I've read some travel books and they're really just like reading somebody's diary. Mm-hmm. It's like Tuesday the 19th, we went such and such and did this and did that. Whereas my style is not like that. I wanted to make it a story rather than a diary. I want to make it an experience rather than even a motorbike story at all. I mean, there's a bit about motorbikes in it, certainly, but it's not what I would call, it's not all about the bike,
Did you think, what is did you do it in like a 3-act process, or thinking about a theme to go through it all, or did you just have an outline, or just start writing and go?
I just started writing and go. I took it from a journal and I de-journaled it, if you like, pick out the interesting bits. And, as I say, you don't want to hear, well, I wrote 500 miles today and tell you every petrol stop you made and whatever. It's written more of a collection of experiences and emotions and feelings and what I thought at that time. But yeah, I mean, a bit I sailed the yacht race, fell into a yacht race in Cape Town. One of the guys had hurt his leg, so I got his place. I'd never sailed anything but dinghies before. Next thing was racing offshore, an ocean race. And the stuff I wrote about it actually was pretty much make very few changes on it, which is interesting because I had more time to write my journal at that time because nothing to do but sit in the boat all day.
Yeah.
So, it's just sometimes it comes easy, sometimes it doesn't. And yes, I should sort of dictate a couple of hours every morning, whatever, but life's not like that. My life's not anyway.
Yeah. Are you approaching it differently for your second one, or the same type of format?
No, I'm approaching it differently because I'm a different person now than I would have been then. And it says it was a coming of age story, which I didn't realize at the time that's what it was, but it's looking back, that's what it was. But I'm now more, it's like coming of old age. Maybe there's more experiences and reflections and more knowledge as to what actually is going on in the world now. Whereas at 21, you don't know what's going on. You're just going from one disaster to the next in a way,
Yeah. So it's a going of age story.
Yeah, going of old age.
What big pieces of wisdom have you learned through the travels then?
Well, when looking back on my life, when I decided to call the bike going the wrong way. Obviously, I left Belfast to go to Australia and I ended up in Argentina. So it's pretty much the wrong way, but I realized that I'd spent my life doing a lot of things the wrong way, and more difficult, more challenging ways. and it's caused me a lot of trouble over the years. I think sometimes I should have done that differently. Save myself a lot of time and expense, but it's been interesting. It's been an interesting life. I've had a few challenges, and I think you get a lot more out of a journey or a project, whatever it is, if it's more of a challenge. If it's too easy, it's too easy.
Any insight into, when you're crossing the deserts or barren places or sailing and you have all the time, any reflection on the reason or the point of life?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably what most people in their 20s are wondering what's it all about, And 40 years later, I'm still wondering. But yeah, there'll be a lot of musings and thoughts that go on in the next one, because you do have time when you're on your own, especially. You have time to think about these things. If you have 20 camera crew banging on your tent door to get you up in the morning to take some photographs, you don't really think about that, I wouldn't imagine.
Right. What's the best way for people to follow your work and get a copy of your book and books?
Well, we've got a website, chrisdonaldson.world, which you can order a book, get a signed book there. Or else Amazon, books on Amazon's got 1,400 5-star reviews, so it's going pretty well. And that's probably the best way for it in the States. You can get it. It's the same. You don't pay a fortune in postage, Amazon I suppose one of the biggest differences between the first journey and the second wasn't even myself getting older. It was probably just what the effect of technology has had on the world, and how you can phone home anywhere in the world practically on WhatsApp. Whereas 40 years ago, you had to go in a post office, book a time, book a slot. It cost equivalent of about $50 to make a 5-minute phone call, So some things are a lot easier, and some things like Amazon, they're destroying the retail world, but it's great that you can sell a book anywhere in the world. Right?
Do you have an Amazon authors page too?
Yeah. Do I? No, I've got a authors page. I don't think I've got a author's bio, but is there a separate page for authors?
You can do if you sell books on Amazon, they give you a place where you can set up an author's page. Maybe
I think I've got a bio on that and a few links to the website.
Okay.
Just got photographs and stuff on. But yeah, I mean, it's been. I was never that intellectual at school. And it's only now I realize I'm probably dyslexic or something like that. In those days, but 40 years ago, if you couldn't spell, you were just called stupid, So the book's going very well, I have to say. It's been a great journey in itself, writing a book. And through that, I've been able to meet up with a lot of guys that I hung around with 40 years ago that had disappeared off the face of the world. But able to look them up on Facebook and say, hey, I'm going to be in Tel Aviv a couple of weeks' time. You want to meet up, or Canada, wherever, and be able to get in touch with some really old friends. It's been great.
Yeah, I see it on Amazon. You have a Kindle version, an Audible version. Did you do that, or did Audible do that on its own?
No, I did. I organized it, but I actually got my nephew, who sings in a band, plays his own band, and he did the audio version, because I thought it's hard to imagine he's got a 60-year-old reading out a story about a 21-year-old. There's times it wouldn't have been quite proper. So it sounds better. Sounds better having a 21-year-old doing it. He's a Belfast boy as well, so the same accent that I would have had. And funny enough, I got a great review from a guy who stopped me on a bike show. He says, I listened to your audiobook and nearly got sacked because he was working for Amazon at the time, doing deliveries. And he pulled into this woman's drive, and he says he was sitting there, he was getting up to an exciting part of the story. And he didn't want to get out of the car to give her parcel, so he was just sitting there and she was looking at him. So I thought it was a nice reaction to have. Somebody was bound by the anticipation of what was going on.
Yeah, that's good. Well, any thing you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts you have in closing?
I suppose a few people asked me what I did the second tourney for. And it was obviously to finish the original idea, which is around Australia. But as guys our age, I think it's important to keep active, keep doing stupid stuff, because once you stop, you realize as you get older, you're not here forever. So it's important to get off your ass and do these things now when you've not just because you're still alive, but because you're fit enough to do it. So that would be my advice to the world.
Makes sense. Do it before you can't do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I have your website and a link to your Amazon information in the show notes, so people can go there and check that out if they'd like.
Brilliant.
But thank you very much for your time.
Been a pleasure. Nice talking to you.
All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.